Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to As I Live and Grieve. You hear me say it every week, but I have a great guest for this week. With us today from the UK, we have Dr. Marianne Trent. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, it's a delight. And I have to say, listeners, she was concerned about whether or not we would understand her accent, but I know most of our listeners are in America, in the States, and who doesn't love a British accent, am I right? Anyway, Dr. Trent, would you start out by giving our listeners just a little bit of your background, please?
Sure. So I am a qualified clinical psychologist, and I qualified in 2011 via the doctoral route in the UK, which means that I was trained by the NHS, which is our National Health Service. Since that time, I have worked in child and adolescent mental health services for 4 years, and then in adult mental health services. And I currently work in private practice, specialising in adult mental health and trauma.
I understand you have a specialty in trauma as well.
Yes, I do. But interestingly, it was probably grief that really helped me focus on
Right.
that trauma specialty. But yeah, I do complex trauma, which is when it's been usually linked to childhood difficulties as well. And yeah, I usually treat that with a variety of approaches, using compassion-focused therapy and something called EMDR. I don't know how rife EMDR is in the States, but it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. But the idea is, and this applies to grief as well, of course, is that when something happens that feels really traumatic, our brains don't necessarily process that in the same way as they do when we're lucid, like we are now, here and then. Because when we are lucid, we're able to say, well, I'm able to say, oh, it's, almost 2 PM on a beautiful sunny June day in the UK here. So I'm able to take all that information in. Whereas when we're stressed, distressed, grieving, really reeling against something, we don't get that same time and date stamping, which means we can't then draw on that time and date stamp. That's why it always feels a bit like it's still happening now. You can't quite assimilate and make sense of that loss because you haven't got the time and date stamp.
Interesting. I'm going to tag that as a topic perhaps for another podcast to have you back. I recently read a book by Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor about your grieving brain, and she did something similar, but she gave an analogy of walking to your kitchen in the middle of the night to get a drink of water, and normally your hip bone would brush against the dining room table. Yet in the darkness, because you didn't turn any lights on, you know your way, all of a sudden you realize that you didn't hit the table, and it's because someone stole your dining room table, and your brain had not yet adapted to that reality. And this sounds like a similar perspective. So that's fascinating. And like I said, I'm going to tag it for another episode. I don't think it's quite popular in the States. At least I've not heard of it. So just another reason to explore. But for our topic at hand today, in my many groups on Facebook, and even with some of my friends in my network and everything, when grief is mentioned, one of the things we always say, well, oh, we're sorry that happened. We make all the little common phrases and everything like that. But it is key, I think, and having experienced it myself, that the person who is grieving, especially early in that process, have some support. We often think, well, that's going to be their family. Maybe it's a child, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a parent, whoever it is. But in truth, there are people that don't have support. So today I want to talk about how important is support while you're grieving. And if you don't have someone near you or someone's near you that you can count on, where do you find it? I know you, doctor, when I believe it was your father who was ill, you had what you named the Dead Dads Club. So maybe you could start by telling us what that was and how important that was to you.
Yeah, firstly, just want to say it was a slightly tongue-in-cheek group that I put together. Don't want to offend anyone who that feels a little bit smarting to, but yeah, I did call it I called it the DDC, and it was the Dead Dads Club, because what I experienced is those people who had lost a parent and lost anyone really. You know, my Dead Dad Club wasn't just populated by people who'd lost a parent or a dad, but they got it more, you know. And even this week, one of my cousin's wife's lost her mum very unexpectedly, really. And I've been supporting her via text message, and she said, God, I didn't get it until now. I didn't get it. And I've realized all the stuff I've been sending people over the years, these pleasantries, that wasn't the thing to say. And really, that was my experience. That's why the DDC was so important, because it was people that knew it was okay to rock the boat. It was okay to ask us tricky questions. It was okay to sit with distress. And if you ask me about my dad, Kathy, you know, if we prod for too long, I may become emotional, but it's not you that's made me cry. You know, it's the fact that my dad's not here. It's the fact that we've had a connection. It's the fact that we've celebrated him and talked about his memory. But you haven't upset me. And that is what people don't understand who haven't yet been affected by grief in the way that you and I have. It's
Right.
okay. It's okay to rock that boat. It's okay to ask people, if you look all right today, Kathy, you know, your hair's looking nice, and, you know, you've got a nice outfit on. Lots of people won't want to mention all of your grief because they're like, she's doing all right. I don't want to upset. I don't want to ruin her day. In actual fact, it might just make your day. And the same was true even, you know, a few years ago before I'd grieved. I guess I was always all right talking about grief. But I hadn't seen a friend for a long time, and she'd lost a very dear dog to her. At that point, she didn't have she didn't have her own children, and I knew how close she was to this dog, and it was in an accident that he died. And when I saw her, I explicitly asked her how she was doing since the loss of her dog, and she did become emotional, but afterwards she messaged me and she said, "Thank you so much, because people do not mention him to me.
Right.
It's like he ceased to exist. It's like suddenly I'm supposed to be okay with this great big gaping hole in my life, and I'm not. And I really liked that I mattered enough to you to check in with me." And that's what I think people want when they're grieving, or they want the choice to be able to say, "Thank you. I really like that you want to talk to me about this, but I can't do this right now." Or actually, I don't need to do that right now. But I think we need to be giving people that choice.
I agree. And, you know, it's been a little over 4 years since I lost my husband, and I still get emotional. In fact, lately, for some reason, it's been almost every day. I find myself a little more emotional than I was a few months ago. I know that's because of some changes going on in my personal life, and I've attributed it to that, and I'm fine with it. But I admit that when I am with a group of people, my husband was an Army veteran. He retired after serving in the Army for over 20 years. So when I am around the group of veterans that he belonged with, these are his brothers, this is our extended family, they always will talk about Tom. And it always makes me feel so good. It may reduce me to tears, but it just makes me feel so good that somebody else remembers him.
Yeah, I
So
hear
that,
you.
that's one of the important things. But you mentioned, somebody, you look good, you're dressed well and everything, and people don't want to bring that up. So sometimes that's perceived as we don't have any support in our lives. So if you're the griever now, and I know you've been in that position, as well as am I, because I know I'm going to grieve for the rest of my life. It's not going to go away. But if you're the griever and you are feeling alone, isolated, that no one gets you because they haven't gone through it, or even if they have, maybe they're just reluctant to bring up the topic for fear of upsetting you, how do you get yourself out of that little bubble of isolation? What do you do? What can you do?
Okay, so you're never alone. You know, so many of us get this, and it's maybe just through whatever circumstance, you don't have people that you feel close to, or you are, socially a bit isolated, or you just move in a slower pace of life. Perhaps you're not working, or, you're not in education, or you just feel like you're not moving and shaking like you've done in the past. And so, sometimes older people tell me they've actually found it really useful to connect to people socially. So Facebook can be a really helpful resource. And please don't be scared off if you're hearing this and you're thinking, no, the internet isn't for me, because it really isn't as bewildering or confusing as it might seem to an outsider. But it is, it's about community, isn't it, Facebook? That's why it really thrives. And it's where Facebook groups, that's where the community really comes alive, because you can actually search and connect to people that are similarly isolated to you, but struggling with the same, what we call the same presenting problem, but you're not necessarily experiencing the same reactions to that, because it can be so broad, can't it? It can be so complex. But I would say if you are struggling to find connection, that Facebook is probably a really good place to explore, and just give it a go. It's okay to feel uneasy about things you've not done before. If you really want to, you can have a little look on YouTube for how to join a Facebook group and how to, follow etiquette if you're worried about upsetting anyone. But that's a really great way of connecting to people, and a way that feels safe as well. So I know when people are grieving, it can feel a bit too daunting to go to a community centre and talk to real people. And sometimes it's the pleasantries outside of grief groups that feel more difficult. It's the queuing up for a cup of tea and, do I have to introduce myself and all that. In a Facebook group, you don't. You haven't got the pleasantries. You can just watch for weeks and weeks and weeks. You can just learn until something resonates with you, until you feel this is a safe place for me. I can show up here. So that's my first top tip, really, would be to do some connecting online.
And that's a great one. And Facebook is known for having different groups. I know I belong to many groups related to grief. One is specific to losing a spouse who was the veteran of a military branch in the country. In fact, one is very specific in the spouses that have lost their love to a particular diagnosis, the very particular brain tumor that my husband died of. So there's that very specific connection, and that's an extremely helpful group.
It's the niching, isn't it? The niching that really helps.
Exactly. As you say, it's perfectly okay to sit there and just read the posts. Sometimes in reading the post, you will get an affinity for some of the other people in the group, because you'll realize that they're experiencing similar to what you're experiencing, and that makes you feel less alone. That's a great suggestion for getting support. Somebody posted in one of those groups, in fact, the other day about, I don't have anybody. I don't know what to do. I feel so alone. I don't know where to look. And I posted to her somewhat. It was with great intention, and I'm trying to focus more on intention in my life lately. So I suggested, instead of looking around her, she first look in the mirror, because that was really the single person that she could count on to help her move forward in her grief. And that once she acknowledged that she could then look around her and look. I mean, there were many books, there are YouTube channels, there are TED Talks, there are movies on Netflix, there are all kinds of resources available. But I suggested she start with herself. Was that accurate? I'm certainly not a licensed clinician, but was that a good place to suggest someone start?
I think so, but I think it really depends on what position we are in our lives as to how well we're able to draw on our own resources. And I guess for me, when my dad died, it was 2017, just before Christmas, I had a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And with the best will in the world, I wasn't resourced enough to be able to parent those very young children. The youngest was still breastfed and woke multiple times a night. What I learned was that grief needs sleep to heal. And when you're not getting it, that's really difficult. So I would say with the best will in the world, if you are stressed, if you are, trying to do lots and lots of things, you're going to struggle to find yourself in all of this. But that said, when I lost a friend to suicide, my children were a couple of years older, and I was then able to, do things that felt a little bit mad at the time, like go for a run in the rain, that I just hadn't been resourced enough to do when I was in the depths of grief for my dad. But I was able to show up for myself differently because I was more resourced. So I would just have a little bit of an audit, and look at what your current resource levels are. So are you sleeping well? Are you eating well enough? Are you physically healthy? Are you stressed in any other areas? If you feel like generally, other than the grief, things are going well, you're kind of hitting all your milestones, then it might be that you've already got those resources in yourself to be able to draw on and be able to think about what things might be helpful for you. But if you aren't in that position, it's going to feel harder to join the dots. It's going to feel a little bit like murder in the dark. You just don't know where to begin, and you could bump into anything at any point. And at that point, a grief counselling specialist or psychologist, or a support group, or someone to help you navigate your way around these bumps, or even to help you see the wood for the trees. So even, I was a psychologist and had worked with many grief cases before I then was grieving, but you can't apply the theory to yourself very easily when you're in the depths of it. So sometimes you just need someone to, again, take you by the elbow and just guide you through that and be your companion. So it's going to be very specifically different on a case by case basis, really, for whether people are able to show up for themselves.
Yeah. We have stated numerous times in our podcast that everyone's grief is different. And I know for myself, with the 4 major losses in my life, everyone has been different. It's been different because it was a different relationship. I was at a different age and different level of awareness of grief and the process and what I needed to do. So it's all been different, and it's different with every person. We like to say it's as unique as our fingerprint. Only you are going through grief in your way. There are similarities, certainly. And that, I think, is where we look for the support. But I believe it is important, as you mentioned initially, to find someone who gets it. And sometimes we get those, what we think are stupid comments about, the person who tells you to just, oh, come on, just, it's been long enough, just get over it. They probably don't get it. So find someone else in your network who does get it.
Yeah, it's not you. It's not you that's broken. It might just be the people around you who are not being functional. Reach out to people if you know people have grieved, but they're not really part of your real mover and shaking life right now. It's okay to reach out to them and try and explore options for connection again with them. They might well be thrilled to hear from you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And as well, if you look to bereavement groups or support groups and things like that, and there are a number, I know right now with, living costs and everything like that, money is tight for many, many people. But there are numerous free resources out there if you cannot afford to contract with a therapist or someone like that. There are resources out there. And the Facebook groups we mentioned before are great places to find those resources. So find someone who gets it, get plenty of sleep. Now, just to kind of change the side of the counter we're speaking on, if you know someone in your circle who has suffered a loss like that, and maybe you have never experienced a loss like that, a significant loss, what can you do as a friend to try to support that person who's grieving?
Okay, I guess you can just let them know that you're there. Let them know that their feelings might not always be easily defined. Let them know that even death is tricky. Hollywood has this idea of death being dying in a warm bed surrounded by people, you close your eyes, it's done. And so many of us, that is not what we see, but that's what lots of people hold in mind about death looking like. And so if someone died at home, you think, oh, well, at least they had a peaceful passing. And it's actually, no, It's okay to say, you might have had a difficult time yesterday. It may not have been as peaceful as you'd hoped for. If you want to talk about any of that, I'm here for you. Sometimes giving people permission to admit that it was blooming awful is really, really empowering in itself. It makes people feel less alien, the fact that you say, of course, I was by my dad's side in a hospice when he died, and I'll never be finished being grateful that he didn't die in the middle of the night without me being there. I'll never be finished being grateful for that, because it was my worst fear, because he was palliatively unwell and I thought he's gonna go and I'm not gonna be there. But my mum, my brother's wife, and I were by his side in the hospice. But that said, it's still not an enjoyable day. It's still not a day at the theme park, is it? You know? And it can be harrowing, aspects of that can be harrowing. And when people aren't in hospice care, if they're in hospital care or passing at home, you haven't got assisted medication to really take away some of that harrowing impact. And that is tricky. We're leaving people with trauma, but often without the support around trauma. So what we've got is we've got people reeling and adjusting and grieving for the loss of this person that they cared a great deal about. And let's not even go to the area of complicated grief where the relationship was difficult as well. Let's leave that for another day. But we're assuming that they love them very much. So they're reeling to that, but they've also got trauma from seeing some of the stuff that went on in the days, weeks, and months before they died. And that's why, grief can be really messy, because you've got to work through that trauma before you can even begin to really get to the grief stuff. And of course, we know with grief that it's often said there's stages of grief, including anger, adjustment, all of that. But the trauma complicates it somewhat as well. So I think that grief always has some element of trauma, even if you weren't there. We've got these fantastic human brains of ours that allow us to imagine that, so someone died in a car crash, you can imagine that, and you start to play that out in your mind, and it can feel really morbid. But so even if someone wasn't there, and you might work with someone who's lost someone during the pandemic, and it was a lifelong partner, but because of the limitations around visiting during that time, they weren't able to be there. So then there's an additional trauma around what they're imagining would have happened and how much they wanted to be there. And that can really get in the way of them grieving and feeling like they were a good enough spouse or daughter or husband, because it extra complicates the situation.
So, good way to support someone, I think I'm hearing you say, is let them know that you're there for them. Let them know that you're there to listen if they want to talk, because maybe in talking about some of the horrible things that they're feeling or that they think they saw or they did see, that in the talking, that will give them space to heal a bit each time. So sometimes it's better to keep your own words to yourself. Just let them know that you're there if they want to talk or listen.
Yeah, you can start that conversation and you can introduce the idea that this doesn't need to be pretty. You can kind of bring your jagged bits here that don't seem to make sense, the bits that make you feel like you're a bit mad, actually. What are you feeling right now that you're probably the only person in the world that's feeling? Because you and I both know you're not the only person that's feeling that. But when we're struggling with something, our brains will tell us it's probably just you. You're a bit mad. No one else is feeling this. But what we know is that that's not the case. And sometimes just knowing that you're not alone, you're only feeling this way because of these tricky human brains of ours, can be really empowering and can just make people feel far more au fait with the process and with the fact that this is going to pass. They won't always feel this way, but don't tell them that right now, because I think that doesn't help. That always will pass. You'll move on. That's not useful. Yeah, just know that. I may say things that feel wrong, but I don't want you to have a vacuum of silence around you. That's why I'm talking to you and encouraging you to be there, because we know a vacuum of silence feels deafeningly loud.
Exactly. Is it possible for someone to go through grief without any support?
Yes, it is. And, as you say that, I'm thinking about perhaps slightly older generations who lost people probably in combat, really, and were taught to just put up and shut up. I think we're getting, I've got two young children. They are now 8 and 6 tomorrow. He'll be very excited. But I look at them with their friends, they're both boys, and they're all hugging each other. They're all about, well done, that's so brilliant, I'm so proud of you. And I think we are raising our children differently than certainly even I'm 41, certainly even I was raised. We're raising people to talk more openly and to communicate and to know that whatever complicated feelings you're having, that's okay. But I think people who haven't been raised in that way are more likely to, as we say in the UK, have a stiff upper lip, aren't we? A stiff upper lip, and just pull yourself together. I'm going to get really British now. Pull yourself together, old chap. It's all right. Just get on with it. But that's not how humans work. We are a connected mammalian species. And I was listening to something yesterday saying about the magic number of 150 and how groups larger than 150 can feel a little bit not that cohesive, but in theory we can have 150 meaningful connections in our life at any one time. But as humans, we do need those connections, and it's thinking, it might be useful to do a little bit of an audit and think about how many people you've got in your life in a meaningful way. And maybe there'll be room for some more. Maybe you could increase your number. But I think it's about connection for humans. We're never, survival of the fittest, mammals, we're not supposed to live by ourselves. That's very vulnerable for us. And so we're supposed to look after each other. We're supposed to be a community. We've got an ability to communicate and talk to each other for a reason. It's not just for summoning, it's not like a car horn. It's only there to alert to immediate danger. It's there. Why not use it? It's there for a reason. So you can give yourself permission to be a mammal, to be a human, and to draw on people around you and have connection. It does not say anything about you if you're struggling. Mental health is a continuum. Sometimes we will stand closer to being well. Sometimes we will stand further away from it, even on a day-to-day basis. The other day I was like, I'm just not in a very good mood, and that's okay. You can lean into that. Whatever you're feeling on any given day, you can lean into. But if it starts to become a trait rather than a state. So the other day I wasn't in a very good mood. That was a state, just a passing state. But if over time I'm in a very bad mood for a few months and I'm struggling to get out of bed, that's becoming more of a trait. That's more problematic. Okay, it's going to impact on my functioning. It's going to impact on my well-being, on my relationships. So really allow yourself to feel your states and to know that that's normal. But if it becomes like it is impacting on you, on risk, on functioning, that your problems are feeling like they're weighing really heavy, then let's really encourage you to connect to other humans and to other ways of coping.
Those are very wise words. I like that very much. I'm probably going to go back and re-listen to that section of the podcast because you said some very, very wise things. So support, although not critical, support while you're grieving certainly is helpful, and it can help bring you along. It can help you move forward, and that's certainly the direction we all want to be headed, is forward, not backward. Sadly, our time has run out again today. That always happens. We get really to the meat of a topic, and there goes the time. But before I sign off, I want to offer you a moment to speak directly to our listeners and tell them more about yourself, the services you offer, how they can reach you.
Sure. Thank you. So I just want to say thank you for listening, and please know you don't need to suffer. It's not a badge of honor. You are allowed to be happy again, and you're allowed to be happy even without the person that you're missing very much. Please know that it doesn't say anything about you if you're able to achieve and enjoy a functional life, even without this person in your life. You're allowed to go on and have rich and rewarding possibilities and encounters. You're allowed to laugh, even though this person is no longer with you. It might not be a person, it might be an animal, whatever you're grieving. Maybe it's your health you're grieving for. You're allowed to still have enjoyable activities and occasions despite whatever you're grieving and mourning for. So that's my little bit of kind of general messages to you. I am the author of a book called The Grief Collective: Stories of Life, Loss and Learning to Heal. And that was put together because I wanted everyone to have their own experience of the Dead Dad Club, of people that know it's okay to rattle your cage when you're grieving. And what it is it's 54 stories of people written by real life people who've grieved, about their experiences with grief. And there's a real mixture in there. There is a loss of siblings, loss of spouse, loss of babies, miscarriages, loss of parents, loss of grandparents. And it's just a lovely book that people have said really, really helps them. If you like my voice, people have said they do, then you can listen to more of me. I specialize also in supporting aspiring psychologists. So if anybody is wanting to one day be a qualified psychologist or to study psychology, you can listen to the Aspiring Psychologist podcast, which is available on all podcast platforms.
Sounds great. As always, we will include Dr. Marianne Trent's contact information, website, and links to her and to her email on our website and in the episode notes. I hope you will reach out to her. She sounds like a great resource. After all, she has done one thing very important today. She has given people who are grieving permission to sleep. Sleep is healthy when you're grieving. So go back to bed, everybody. It's part of self-care, right? We want you to take care of yourselves. And we hope you will tune in again next week as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.